guys, welcome back to the channel. We're still reading Alan Watts' Eastern Wisdom, Modern Life. Today we're going to look at chapter number 5, and that has to do with the fundamental myths of humanity. So we start out with the question, what is a myth? And Alan Watts refers to the term myth as an image in terms of which people make sense of life and the world. In other words, the lens through which you conceive the world. So also it helps us to understand, your place in the world. So in this chapter, Alan Watts describes two of the greatest myths that have influenced the thinking of humanity. According to Watts, they are the universe as an artifact, being the first one, and that is supposed to govern the religions of Christianity, Judaism and Islam. And the second myth is the world as drama, and that underlies the religions or philosophies of the East, namely Hinduism and Buddhism. These two great myths describe the underpinnings of all these traditions. So let's take a look at these two myths. The first one he calls the ceramic model, or the universe as an artifact. So in this myth, your image of the world roughly is that there is a God, and you conceive of that God as, a personal, living, intelligent spirit. And you also think that God created humans, just or much like a potter, makes pots out of clay, which is why Watts also calls it the myth of the ceramic model. And so in a way, God is a supreme technocrat, if you will, because he knows all the answers and understands everything in detail and could tell you all about it if he could. Also, your image of a human in this myth is that humans are different from God, and that they're something like God, but they're not God. And I'd like to read you a short quote summarizing this first myth. Some very interesting consequences follow from this idea of the world as an artifact. What follows is that the whole universe is seen as a marvelous technological accomplishment. If it was created, there must be an explanation of how it was made. And the whole history of Western thought has in many ways been an attempt to discover how the Creator did it. What were the principles? What laws were laid down? What is the blueprint that underlies this creation? This image has persisted throughout Western history and continues on into a time when very many people do not believe in Christianity or Judaism or Islam. If in turn you don't believe in a God, so if you're an atheist or an agnostic in this Western culture, you believe that the world is sort of like an automatic machine, something that made itself. So that's also possible. Of course, in the 18th century, people sort of began to drop the idea that there's a personal God, and personal God means essentially that we conceive of God as a person. But they still sort of kept this artifact of a ceramic model of the world. Only that now it's a fully automatic model, And so in consequence, you still, as a human being, try to figure out, how things are sort of put together, and you still try to break them down into parts, which leads you down the road to what's called reductionism. You try to reduce things to their essential parts. And under this fully automatic model, human beings are regarded as special because they combine both, the capability to love, but also the capability for reason. So we regard ourselves as special and as sort of like the epitome of creation. And each one of us feels that we are a speck of consciousness or mind living inside a vehicle called the body. So your sense of yourself in relationship to the world under this model is that you're likely to feel unimportant and lonely, because to quote Alan Watts again, our basic image of ourselves is of a soul, an ego, a mind by itself in its little house, looking out at the world that is strange and saying, that is not me. So you see, there's a connection between this underlying myth and your basic feeling, with regards to yourself, but also with regards to your relationship to the world. And that is pretty much that of a atomistic sort of image, or an atomistic kind of view, it's that we're all billiard balls sort of bouncing off of each other, but essentially separate from each other. Now, in contrast to that, he portrays a different model that's available, and that is what he calls the dramatic model, or the enacted universe. And it's the basic myth that underlies Eastern religions and philosophy. And in that, your image of the world roughly is, that God did not make the world, but it acted the world, or enacted the world, that the world is God's play, and that the basic motivation of existence, or the basic pulse of life, is a game. So all of life is vibration and pulsation. And your image of human beings is that each one of you is God, and that under the surface of reality we are all actors playing out our parts. There comes the question, of course, when you think of, and it doesn't really matter which myth you adhere to, if you believe in a God or if you don't, or if you believe in a God as creator, or if you believe in a God that's basically playing out the world, and doing all the acting via avatars, which essentially would be us, all of us. There comes a question in each of these models, and that's a very fundamental question, which is, why is there evil in the world? So both myths have a different answer to that question. And in the Christian tradition, we would say that, if there's a God, there must be something besides God, or opposite to God, which would be evil, or Lucifer, or whatever names evil has. And the other explanation for why there's evil is that, man disobeyed the law of God, which is why there's evil. Now, contrast that with the Eastern or Hindu tradition that Alan Watts talks about, and there it's more like, as in every good drama, there has to be good and evil, otherwise it would be really boring. So there has to be heroes and also villains. So on the surface, there is good and evil, but in the end, it's all part of a big play. Also, apart from there being evil and that being a problem for us humans, the other disturbing bit for a lot of us could be the notion that, well, if we all are God, then where is the basis for morality? Because technically, if we are all God, then anything goes. And one could say, well, we can do whatever we want. And according to Watts, there's a sort of basic setup to this whole game, which is the world, or which is God's play. And that is, I'll quote him again, "What is necessary is a system in which the good side is always winning, but is never the winner, where the evil side is always losing, but is never the loser." So he speaks of there being a balance, and he speaks of there being somewhat of a fairness, in the totality of this game. And it also speaks of the game never ending, really, because there's never a final winner or a final loser. But it's more like these two poles make for the excitement of the game, even though at the time for us, when we experience evil, that's really hard to accept. But then, in my personal opinion, I find that thinking, that there's someone or some entity who basically decides what happens to us is much more just incomprehensible. That's my personal opinion. So I personally veer more to the myth of the game, if you will. So again, that was another short one for today. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you next time.